Welcome to the Gone Fishing Podcast, episode 45. In today's episode, I'll be discussing how to arise out of the ashes with Deborah Lovett. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Gone Fishing Podcast. Join Ron Bouchard as he casts a wide net sharing his philosophy of life, business, and success, and goes fishing for wisdom in interviews with other entrepreneurs, authors, and thought leaders. You'll hear their stories of triumph and tribulation. If you're an aspiring entrepreneur trying to succeed outside the confines of the current of social expectation, bring the bait and join us for Gone Fishing.
Today's guest is a God-driven speaker who captivates her audiences with humor and real-life experiences. She's a powerful, engaging storyteller whose content is always rooted in the Word of God. The Holy Spirit has taught her how God desires to give us victory in all circumstances. Her passion is to speak to women about how they can fall in love with Jesus because he chose them. They can live in Christ and arise out of difficult circumstances through love, forgiveness, and the grace of God. Deborah is best known for her book, Arise Out of the Ashes, which chronicles the complete loss of her home, the two gifts God left behind, and the redemption that followed. Deborah began as a woman's ministry leader in a large church in Ohio. After planning, organizing, and teaching for many years, God directed her to begin writing her own studies in her first award-winning book, Gushing Springs. The writing in turn led to her to testify to women on behalf of God. She stepped out in faith, and churches began calling, and she hasn't looked back. Speaking at conferences and events from coast to coast. Please welcome Director of Development for Dayton Urban Life, coach, author, and speaker, Deborah Lovett. Hello, Deborah. How are you?
Hi. Thanks for having me today. I'm doing
Thanks
great.
for being on this program. So, you have had quite a history.
You might say that.
Yeah. So the Bible tells us in Jeremiah 32:39, I will give them a single purpose in life, to honor me for all time, for their own good and the good of all the descendants. Now, I believe that we were created for God's purpose, this purpose, and that he also gave us an individual mission, which I call the divine mission. How do you feel about that?
I agree with you. I kind of think of it in a twofold way as well. I feel like what we do on a day-to-day basis is kind of our vocational calling, or how we play out God's gifts in our lives. And then like who he made us to be, our soul, our body, our spirit, is our faith calling. So it's just another way of maybe different language than what you use. But that's who created God, who he created me to be and who he created you to be. And then how we respond to that. So like for me, I feel like who he created me to be is all wrapped around the verse in Proverbs 3:5-9, which says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. And so I kind of feel like that has been what God put into me as my faith calling. And then writing and speaking and coaching has been the way that I use those gifts.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's all different language and context.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying the same thing. I believe actually we have 5 callings. So one is a personal calling, an individual calling, but there's also 4 other callings, which, having a relationship with God, being Christ-like, being part of the church, and etc. So I believe that there are individual callings, and I believe that there are callings that we all share in together.
Yes. I think people throw that word calling around a lot, and a lot of people don't even understand what it means.
Yeah. Well, vocation, the word vocation actually means calling, to be called.
Mhm.
So I usually say a calling is something very personal and very specific to you. It's something God is speaking to you about.
Right.
He speaks to us on different paths. We could have several callings. Like right now, I think he's calling me to do something. I think there's a difference between a big divine mission, a big life calling, and the individual task he has to do along the way.
Yes.
So he might call us to do a task, but that's different than our divine mission.
I agree.
So I feel that our experiences through our life have prepared us in a way for carrying out the divine mission. And those experiences make us strong. Can you tell us a little bit about the article that you were said to write and the tragedy that followed?
Yes, I was asked to write an article for the Alliance Life magazine on a family that had had a suicide in their immediate family, and they had raised funds at the memorial service and decided to build a church in Guatemala with those funds in order to honor that loved one. Now, at the time, I knew nothing about suicide, had never been involved with it. And so I had went to my pastor and talked to him about it to get his feelings and his knowledge and his wisdom on it. And then I went to the family and interviewed them and wrote the article. And several weeks later, my own sister committed suicide. And so I really feel like God prepared me in advance for that tragedy that happened to our family. And then years later, she had been writing a book. She was emotionally abused. She had 3 children, and she had been writing a book. She was brilliant. She actually had her master's degree in international business and knew 5 languages. And she had turned to alcohol from the emotional abuse, became a really bad alcoholic, and had several DUIs and ended up in the county jail with a master's degree, and was one of the only women in there that had a degree. Most of them didn't have their GED. And she wrote every single day. And so then I took her book and I turned it into a memoir, or it's her memoir, really. I wrote a prologue and an epilogue to it called 22 Days in the County Jail. And it, chronicles her life. And then at the end, it tells about suicide.
Wow. Tough circumstances. I believe that we have experiences early on that prepare us as well. As you were telling the story, I remember I was teaching children with disabilities. And I was going through school and said, why am I here? This is not what I really want to do. I ended up choosing a different path. But years later, my son was born severely and profoundly handicapped. So I think that was preparing me for that time in my life. Also, when I was earlier in my youth, I was being called to do sign language. I don't know what it was about sign language. I was very interested in sign language. So I took a couple of sign courses, almost became an interpreter. I was only 18 years old. And I was really called to do this sign language thing. And it dropped off, didn't really think about it much. And then my daughter was born hard of hearing. So those really helped me with that journey. And when my son and my daughter were born, I wasn't afraid. I knew what to do and I was fine. So I think our life prepares us for the journey ahead. So
I agree. Most definitely.
Yeah. So you had a tragedy with your sister committing suicide, and you had another tragedy that followed, right?
Yes. And that was, I'd like to just say on suicide, that is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. For anybody that's listening that is thinking about it, they need to remember, if nothing else, that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And, if they just can sleep and wait 3 days, just like Jesus went to the tomb for 3 days and then they rolled the rock away, God will come. He will try and show up, and he will. They just need to believe. So 5 years later, after that ripple effect went through my family, our house burned to the ground. And we had only been in that home for 5 years. My husband and I built it. And one night he was just making us dinner and there was an explosion in the garage. And the next thing I know, he's got the phone in his hand and he's calling the fire department and he's yelling, "Fire, everybody out." And so my daughter had a friend over. They went running out of the house. I went running out. My husband went running out. And I was thinking, oh, this is just going to be a garage fire. You know, the firemen will come, they'll put it out. We'll be back in our beds by nighttime. But it ended up being a towering inferno. And one thing led to another. And our entire home burned to the ground with everything in it. So it was very traumatic.
Yeah, I can imagine losing everything.
Yes.
So
every single thing that you own.
Except for 2 items.
2 items, correct. One was my Bible, and it was on my nightstand next to my bed. And the other was a pewter plate that says, "Give us this day our daily bread."
So what about the nightstand? Did the nightstand burn?
Oh, yes.
But the Bible didn't.
No, the Bible did not. And I had a girlfriend that called, she kept calling me saying, "I know God left something for you. I know God left something for you." And, you know, I had 2 teenage children at the time. And so I was, you know, in a funk, first of all, and I'm just trying to take care of my children, get them food and clothing. And it's exam time and they're in high school. And so I just really didn't want to listen to her. And the third time she called, and her name was Katrina, by the way, and that was right after Hurricane Katrina. And I thought, oh, God really has a sense of humor. But she said, "You know, I just know he left something for you." And she just had a really good ear for hearing the Lord on my behalf when I could not. And I said yes to her. And so she picked me up. We went over, she went in, and I just couldn't take it because of the smell and the heat and just the ashes and the sight of everything. And she literally asked me where my nightstand was. It was like God not only spoke to her, but told her where it was. It was the most amazing thing probably that will ever happen in my life.
You didn't tell me that part of the story. That is pretty.
It's in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's amazing.
It is amazing.
So she's being led. I mean, I remember having a couple of instances where I think God was talking to me, but not to that extent. One of which, I was a young kid and I was at camp, and my son was I was at camp, and my father was at the golf course, and I had this feeling, this real deep feeling. I wonder if my father's okay. I wonder if my father's okay. I got home and I said, "Is Dad okay?" He said, "Well, actually, he went to the hospital yesterday because he got hit in the back of the head with a golf ball. He got hit and got knocked out." And at that moment, I said, "What time was that?" She said, "It's about 2:00. I said, "That's exactly the time I had that feeling." It's weird how those things happen, and you kind of write them off. And I'm sure other people have those feelings and they write them off, but your friend didn't. Your friend took it and was persistent about it.
Very persistent. I'm so thankful.
Yeah. And you end up with I don't know how the Bible, I mean, made out of paper, goes without burning.
Well, and not only that, they put water on my home from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And because you didn't even know the Bible was there.
So they put water on my house trying to get the fire out. It was so huge, people could see it from miles and miles away. So they just had one problem after another trying to get water to my home. So not only did it not burn within those 12 hours, the pages did not stick together.
That's.
I know. So it's not only just the fire, it was also the water. So I always say, you know, people were like, "Well, what do you make of that?" And I'm like, well, I make of that God left me his calling card. He wanted me to know that he was there in the fire with me, with my family. He left his calling card, and that was the Bible. And then,
were you faithful before that?
oh yes, I was speaking to women across the country about the woman at the well,
Right.
of all things, the water.
Yeah.
And as I stood in my front yard, we had two pastures because we had horses at the time. And I was, as I'm watching my home burn to the ground, and they can't get the water to the fire, the only thing I could think of was, this is just amazing. I speak all over the country about water,
Yeah.
and they can't get water to my house. And I'm thinking, this is so symbolic of our society today. We have this rising heat, and people are walking around with empty wells. There's no water to put on the heat because Jesus is the living water, and if we could apply that to the heat of the situation, how many of those situations and difficulties and trials and troubles would actually dissolve, and those fires would be extinguished from knowing Jesus and knowing his word, the Bible, the closed captioned for the hearing impaired, right?
Yeah.
People that tell me they can't hear God, I'm like, just open the Bible. That's his word. So I would literally, that's what was going through my mind as I was watching my home burn to the ground. It was amazing.
I mean, and that's the last time you had any tragedy, right? I mean, life's been good since then.
Oh, no.
No.
No, I wish I could say it had. My life was a fairy tale until my sister took her own life. And my life has been one tragedy, one trouble, one trauma after another ever since then, with little bitty breaks in between. So I'm now to the point where I believe, it used to be where women, I have normally speak to women, so would have like one trial at a time. Now I think we multitask trials and traumas. We don't have just one, we have like 2 or 3 at a time that we're dealing with, because we are like this sandwich generation where we're taking care of our parents, at the same time we're taking care of our kids, and at the same time we're having trials of our own because we're empty nesters, or we have health issues or whatever. So nowadays I see that we're dealing with 3 or 4 tragedies or troubles at the same time, which is much harder. So like right now, I am personally dealing with, my husband has aggressive bladder cancer. My mother is 90 years old. I just lost my father in 2019. We're moving my mother from her home to an independent living situation.
Mhm.
And so, we've been taking care of my mother. And then, I have a sister that's not been well. I've lost another sister to throat cancer. It has been an ongoing situation. I lost a friend last summer to a stroke. I lost a very dear friend. She took her kids to Marco Island and drowned at spring break. I mean, I have had just one thing after another, after another, after another, after another. So no, my life has not been a fairy tale since then.
So I tend to look at life as an ocean, and how well we survive on that ocean has to do with the strength of our boat. And when we have a nice strong foundation under us, we can ride out the storms. But if we don't have a strong foundation, if we don't have a strong boat, we get ravaged. And I think that your foundation is evident. You have a strong foundation, and these tragedies, while tragic, have not defined you. They've not broken you. And that's just a testament to your strength.
Well, there's some days they break me, but
Well, we all take on water, the storm,
Yeah.
and we all take on water, but it's much easier to take on water when you have a strong boat.
yes. I mean, each trial, I try and look for an attribute of God. I mean, now that I see that they're just not going to stop,
Right.
I used to think, okay, I've had my share. there's not going to be any more shoes dropping on me because I've had my share. Now I've taken it to a different level and I'm like, this is just life. So now I'm like, okay, I need to figure out what God's either trying to teach me, even though the trial's not specifically coming from him, he has allowed it to reach me. So I need to figure out what he's trying to teach me, or what attribute of himself he's trying to show me about himself, or what he's trying to show me about myself that needs to be changed.
Yeah, because God doesn't make the tragedies happen. He allows them to happen, but he uses them for his glory.
Correct.
So there's always something in that tragedy that we can use. So it's lemons out of lemonade. There's always a lesson we can learn to strengthen us.
Correct. And I was born on Easter Sunday, Ron, which is really amazing if you think about it, because death, burial, and resurrection. And so what I have really learned to do in these trials and traumas is to find a point of death, find a point of burial, and then find the point of resurrection. The point of resurrection is where that trial or trauma or trouble has actually turned around and brought glory to God.
So you teach that there are 5 things that you've learned on your journey.
Yes.
Right? And arising from the ashes. And that's after your book, Arise from the Ashes.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about those 5 things?
Sure. I love these 5 things. It's called Arise. So ARISE. And A is agree and acknowledge God. So, just like I told you, my life verse was trust in the Lord with all your heart. So really that's the starting point, is agreeing with God that this trial is happening, because if you live in denial, you're never going to get through it. And the point of trials and troubles is to get through them, to not get stuck. So, and to acknowledge God, because he says, if you acknowledge me, I will rescue you. So A is to agree with him and to acknowledge him. And then R is to remember to pray, because he gave us that pewter plate in the fire that says, give us this day our daily bread. That is part of the Our Father prayer. And so I really believe that the R is just remember Jesus, remember what he did for us, and remember to pray. Remember to be in communion with him. He said when he was in the upper room with his disciples before he died, remember to do this in remembrance of me, do this in remembrance of me, as he broke the bread. And so I kind of combine those 2 things, the Lord's Prayer, and then just remembering to break bread, which is the communion with him through prayer. And the I is to identify his voice or increase your faith, because they're both really the same thing. I think as you can identify God's voice in your life, whether that be seeing him in creation or hearing him through another person or reading his word or hearing a sermon and having something really stick out, however it is that God designed you to hear him, I just feel like identifying his voice is the way that he makes our path straight. It's the way he shows us who he is. It's the way he shows us who he is and who we are and how much he loves us. And then S is to stand firm, because the devil wants to devour us through these trials, troubles, and traumas. They are the fiery darts, and our faith is what is our shield. And also to stand firm, because the devil wants to sift us like wheat. And so S is you have to stand firm. Like you said, you have to have a firm foundation. You have to have a good boat.
Yes.
Or you're going to be on sinking sand. And then the E is to encourage others. I looked up in the Bible how many times it says to encourage one another, and I wrote all the verses down, and it filled an entire sheet of paper on both sides. encourage one another. So how do you encourage one another? Because it says, once I have taught you these things, once I have comforted you, once I have seen you through the trial, turn back and encourage your brothers. And so the E is to get to that last point, to get to the point where you're through the trial and you can actually turn back and encourage someone in their trial so that they don't get to the point where they want to take their own life. So that you can, so you help them forgive who they need to forgive. You help them to understand Jesus' forgiveness for them. You help them to learn how to live. You help them to learn how to give, instead of being stuck in their own minds and their own troubles. You try and help them to give, because we reap what we sow. And so getting them out of that trauma and getting them to a point where they can give to other people is so helpful, even in the midst of their trial or trauma, because it's so healing for people. So the E is just to encourage others.
And people can't see past the pain that they're in. So pain is, we're all going to experience pain. Each one of us has pain that we're going to experience. And not all of us have to suffer, though, because suffering is optional. Pain is not. Suffering is when we have pain and we feel like there's nothing we can do about it. There's always something we can do with our pain. So a lot of times it's very simple things that cause us pain, like your life doesn't match up to your model of the world. So your reality and your model of the world, they don't match up. So we have pain and we get really angry with people because, we should be doing this and this is what our reality is. But we can do something about that. We can either change the model or we can make our life match up to the model that we have. Very simple. Suffering is optional, but it's a loss of hope that causes us to suffer. And Jesus is hope. And without that peace, how are we going to have hope? There's always hope with Jesus. There's always hope with God. It's not a hopeless situation. That's what faith is all about. Putting your faith in him and knowing it's going to be okay. It's not going to be easy, never going to be easy. There's always going to be the storms. But we got to keep our eye on the prize. I like to think about is on that water, there's a lighthouse. And it's shining out on that water. We don't always see it because we get stuck in the current, going around in circles in the darkness. But the lighthouse is still there. It's still shining. It's still calling us home. It's still calling us in his direction. We have an option to find it or not. But we're much happier with the light. That's what hope is. That's where the path is. That's where the way is. And we just got to nudge people to the way.
Amen.
And that's what people will be much happier. People will be much happier when they have the light guiding them, not mankind. Mankind will let you down every single time.
So true.
But the light will always shine in the water.
I love that.
So we gotta go towards the light.
I love that.
And Jesus said he is the light of the world. He also says the way, the truth, and the life. So he's the light. He's also the living water. So he brings you to the lighthouse. He's everything.
He is. He's everything.
He's life.
When you have nothing, you believe you honestly understand that when you have absolutely nothing, that Jesus is everything. He's all you need. He is enough.
Yeah, and he went through the hot water too.
Yeah.
I mean, his life was not easy. The world will try to devour you. The devil will. I say there are 3 Ds with the devil: death, destruction, and deception. That's it. That's all you get. It might seem pretty. It might be wrapped in a bow at first, but it always ends in death, destruction, and deceit. Always.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what you want from life. You want life or death?
You choose.
Yeah. You want truth or deceit?
God's a gentleman. He lets us choose.
Yes. He's the only one. And if you look at life, it's very easy to see things that are good and things that are not. Things that are good, we have free choice. We have free will. So we have consequences from that free will. But God gave us free will. We have a right. Freedom in our country is based on we have free will because we have natural rights given to us by God. Doesn't mean we're going to make the right decision. Doesn't mean we're going to follow the light, but we have that option. Because if God forces us to follow the light, we're not really following the light. If God forces us to love him, we're not really loving him. When we choose to love him, that's love.
Yeah. And I think when we see him and how much he loves us, there's like no way you can't love him.
Yeah, and I think there's no way you can't understand that he's real, knowing what you know when you know.
Right. When you know that you know that you know, you know.
Yes. Yeah, it's a knowing. It's not a wondering anymore. In fact, a lot of scientists will say it's a scientific impossibility for there not to be intelligent design. But I'm going to believe it anyway. I'm going to believe the lie anyway. Because they choose ego over truth. And that's their choice.
Yeah, I mean, that's pride.
That is pride.
You know, there's three voices: the voice of conviction, the voice of the devil, and the voice of pride. And so that's the voice of pride.
I've never heard that before. So you work for Dayton Urban Young Life.
Yes.
And up until we talked earlier, I didn't even know what that was. And it really intrigued me because I've now pictured 5 or 6 people who could really, I know their path, and this would really put them on their path. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what Dayton Urban Young Life is and why it's important?
Well, Dayton Urban Young Life has been around since 1941. And it's the corporate headquarters is in Colorado, and it's all over the world. The one that I specifically work for is Dayton Urban Young Life. And so I work with African-American kids mostly that are in high school. And what we do in Dayton Urban Young Life, it's a teen mentoring program. And we go to them on their turf, in their culture. We build bridges and authentic relationships with them, meet their parents, invite them, the children then, to attend social gatherings, educational Christian programs, which eventually, after having a leader with them that does these things, they get invited to a Christian camp, a Christian Young Life camp. And those camps are all over the world, and they are extremely nice camps. I call them glamping because it's not really like camp. They are really nice. And the kids get away from what they know, and then they get inundated in the love of Christ for 7 whole days and get treated like kings and queens and feel the absolute love of God. And seeds are planted. And so my job is, as director, I'm the director of development. And so I try and raise funds for them because it costs us $1,000 a kid to send to camp because our kids don't have underwear, t-shirts, shoes, backpacks. So it costs us a little more to send a kid to camp than somebody like in suburban Young Life. And so my job is to do that. And I do administrative work and their fundraisers and small gatherings and just those types of things, what's ever needed. A couple months ago, they needed 12 bicycles. So I came up with 12 bicycles.
And you said that of the kids, very few of them even knew the name of Adam and Eve.
Yes. Our director sat down with like 58 of them and was having a discussion about Adam and Eve because they had just had a kid had died in an auto accident. And so the kids were asking about like, where's he going to go? And so he decided to start at the beginning with Adam and Eve. He said that only, I think 5 out of the 58 had ever heard of Adam and Eve. Only 5 kids out of 58 had ever heard of him. I mean, that's just amazing to me. You know, and the other amazing thing to me is like, one of the girls said something about his wedding ring. And I was like, why did she talk about your wedding ring? And he was like, because they don't see wedding rings. They only have a one parent family. And it's normally a single mom, but almost, I'd say 90% of those kids, maybe 95%, only have one parent, or they'll have one parent and a grandparent. And so they just come from very, very poor backgrounds, and they need Christ in order to find their identity, because otherwise the society and the family that they're in defines it, and then they have no hope.
No, it leads them to the darkness.
Yes.
Leads them to the darkness with all the stigma. And we know now that, what they're being taught is absolutely incorrect. And we have a society of victims, and it's on purpose. We have people being victimized, and they're going to, if they believe that there's no hope, they live a life that's hopeless. They become a victim and they become angry. If you're stuck, how do you feel? You feel stuck. You're like a caged animal. You can't move. You're stuck. It's kind of like the rat race too. A rat race, people get hopeless on the rat race. They go round and round in circles through life, and they say, is there anything else? And they don't know how to find more, because society's not very good at teaching them how to find more. Society's only good at teaching you how to conform.
That's so true. We had a little girl that she was getting ready to take her own life. She was in high school, and she opened up her mailbox and found the invitation to the Young Life camp. And it was just enough to give her hope. She didn't take her own life.
And that's all it takes. And you take hope and you give faith and you show them the reality of their situation. I usually say, you're not the sum total of your past, but the architect of your future. You can create any life you want, provided you know you have the power.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing holding you back from the life of your dreams, except for you and your belief system, or what I told you is I call the monkey. The monkey on your back is the thing that's keeping you from all you ever wanted, but you didn't program the monkey. So it's time to program the monkey.
Yeah, I love that.
So anything else you'd like to add? We've had a great discussion.
Oh, no, I just appreciate you having me on today, and just hope that, people will listen, and it will go from their mind and their knowledge drop down 18 inches to their heart, so that they really, really get a feel for God's love.
Yeah, so it's not only a conscious, understanding, it's a knowing.
Correct.
You have to know.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, it's unshakable when you know.
So true.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for being here today. And where can people find out more about you?
www.deborahlovett.org, and it's DeborahLovett. Love it or leave it, right? That's what I always say. Love me or leave me, but whatever. I don't want the ones that don't love me to stay around, so just leave me.
That's right. You don't want to change for them.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, or womenofthewell.org. So either place is my website. And then I have several Facebook groups. One is called Women Gathered. We have 1,300 women on there that are prayer warriors. That's a great page for people that need prayer.
We'll have to talk about that after.
Yeah.
I know someone who needs prayer right now. Anyway, you can also find out more about Deborah by visiting the links in the show notes of this episode. And remember,
we're on my Instagram.
Yeah. Remember, life is an ocean. A strong boat, your foundation. If you want to succeed, identify a harbor, unfurl your sails, sail outside the currents of social expectation, and let's go fishing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Gone Fishing Podcast. Connect with us at www.waypointmastermind.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter to receive our free tools and resources. This podcast has been brought to you by Waypoint Mastermind. personal growth, and support through collaboration with a community of like-minded achievers. See you in the next episode.